So I wanted to take some time today to pause as Kristen Swan reminded us in episode 25 to pause and to step back and really look at what the past few months have been like interviewing guests, having conversations, and sitting with this idea of work. Then to look forward and even share some quick insight on the fourth book I'm working on to help you with your work and find meaning in it. I want to call this point in the show Be Inspired by Many, but Influenced by Few. And I mean that intentionally because I can bring a lot of people onto the show, and there's no shortage of interesting resumes, impressive titles, or highlight reels. And thanks to Podmatch, a big potential list of people eager to talk about their work and what sucks about it. What I've been trying to capture, what I've been listening for, are the people who genuinely want to talk about their work. Not just what they do, but how they experience it, how it affects them, how it shapes their days, their relationships, their sense of meaning in life. Because people are frustrated with work right now. Corporate sucks. That's not breaking news. Work sucks in general. And we're seeing it more than ever, especially in corporate, not just entrepreneurs. And yet, this is the part I keep coming back to. There are still pockets where we find that we like it. Moments where something clicks in the day, where effort feels purposeful, where we don't just survive the day, but actually feel a little more alive because of it. That tension really is the heartbeat of the show. This episode also marks a couple of milestones. This is episode 38, and I originally started the show back in July of 2025. It's now January 2026. So, not knowing where it would go or who it would reach, since then the podcast has crossed over 2,000 downloads and has even been featured in Google News and CB Herald. And while the numbers matter to some extent, and I'll talk about that later, what matters more to me now is the skills as a host and an interviewer, and they're improving. I'm learning how to ask better questions, and you're probably hearing it in some episodes as I fumble to get the wording. This vulnerability, though, is what we really need to make our work more meaningful amongst others. It forces us to learn how to listen more deeply and how to create space for more of these meaningful conversations about the work we all do. Recently, I attended PodFest 2026 in Orlando, Florida earlier this month, and honestly, it was amazing. Alex Sanfilippo from Podcasting Made Simple was there, the owner of Podmatch, and he had asked me to be a VIP guest for the event. Almost at the same time, Buzzsprout, who hosts this podcast, invited me as well as a VIP guest. And that alone was really cool because these people are seeing the potential of the show. It was also an extra added sort of boost of confidence I needed when I stare at my screen each week, wondering if this is making an impact on people's lives and how they view work. Because, I'll be honest, I get frustrated with myself when I listen back and hear these things and the things I'm always trying to say, okay, I got to keep proving on this as a host. It's funny because we can be so hard on ourselves sometimes. What made it even more crazy though at PodFest, and some of you know this already, was that I got a concussion the Monday before leaving for the event. Now, I just want to say I'm okay. I've been to my PCP, I've got a CT scan, all these things. I feel fine. But essentially picture the equivalent of a 50-pound weight hitting the side of my head. And that definitely sucked. But I remember telling my girlfriend though before I left to Florida from New Hampshire is that no one's going to remember Tony not being there at PodFest, this epic podcasting conference. They'll only remember if I show up. And I want to be very clear here, though. If you're seriously injured, obviously don't push yourself. Go see a doctor. And don't do things, your doctor would otherwise tell you not to do. That's not the lesson, right? But this moment did remind me of something I've talked about before back in episode 6, why you're busy but not productive. One of my personal operating principles, what my brother, jokingly calls my hyper productivity, is this idea that there's no such thing as an excuse, only a difference in priorities. Now, to be crystal clear, I wasn't bleeding, nothing extreme happened, no seizures, numbness in any limbs. So, after weighing my safety and health and all these things, I realized I could navigate a persistent headache and manage it through the conference. So, down I flew. And oddly enough, the concussion slowed me down in a way that became almost meditative the entire week. I had to move more mindfully, pay attention to my energy, take breaks because my head was literally throbbing. And in that slowed down state, though, I absorbed the conference, I think, in a deeper way. I learned a ton, techniques I'm already trying to implement on the show as I speak to you, and new ways of thinking about authenticity, audience connection, and even storytelling. One of the biggest takeaways was this. It was people want authenticity. They want the behind the scenes version of life, not just the polished highlight reel and all these things we see on social media. And, I wish I could say things are easy, right? When you see these things, you hear these posts, you hear these episodes or whatever. And, from the outside, yeah, it looks like, I'm getting featured in the news now and the downloads have been going up, but the struggle is real, right? There are days where I don't want to show up behind the mic, days I get pissed off, days where I question whether this is worth the effort, days where I'm like, oh, I got an interview, all these things. It takes us back to the idea of having to do something versus getting to do something, right? We learned that back in a previous episode on the show. And the bigger picture of why I started this really keeps me motivated, right? And it's because I want to redefine how we work today. I know this is all part of my version of a good life, my song and dance, my impression of what living well looks like. So at Podfest, I met some really incredible people. Like I said, Alex and his team, even the Buzzsprout team that hosts this podcast, the other podcasters, of course, creators and thinkers who all, in their own way, are really wrestling with similar questions. It was wild hearing people laugh when I explained the premise of the show, Work Sucks, but I Like It. Almost everyone nodded and almost everyone got it immediately. There was a session at the conference that shared some industry statistics I want to share with you quick here, and not as a competition with other podcasts, but as a way of orienting ourselves with where we stand as a show. Right now, the podcast averages about 100 downloads a week, give or take, while the industry average sits about 29. We've crossed 2,000 total downloads at the time of this recording. I've been able to even monetize one aspect of the show as well. Not enough to pay the bills, but enough to start covering some basic subscriptions to publish episodes each week. That matters and is exciting to me, not just financially, but symbolically. It's a measure of value. And that ties directly into something I keep talking about, bringing up in the show with my first book, The Impression of a Good Life, Finding Your Song and Dance. The word value has two meanings. One is the standards by which you live your life, and the other is what something is worth. And as Ron Reich reminded us, it's that we really need both, right? And so when you listen to this podcast, you're giving me your time, and time is the most valuable thing you have today. My goal is to give you something worthy of that exchange, something that helps make work a little less frustrating, maybe even something that helps you thrive with the skills to continually develop. As even myself, I'm trying to develop these skills today. So let's address the elephant in the room, though, because some of you have noticed that I recently went from releasing one episode a week to two. And you might be thinking, Tony, I barely have time to keep up with one. And that's okay, right? This isn't Pokemon. You don't have to catch them all. Some episodes are going to resonate more than others. I do the same thing with podcasts, to be honest. I read the titles, read the descriptions, and I choose the ones that speak to what you're feeling right now, to what I'm feeling right now. So let that episode help you tune into whatever skill or perspective you're currently developing or trying to work through. That's a skill right there in the world of choice we have today. Fine tune your ability to seek the information you truly need in this given moment. So, why two episodes a week though? So, honestly, because the systems are really flowing. With the help of Podmatch, Buzzsprout, and Riverside, a one person team can do a lot today. Podmatch has allowed me to book guests months out. It's January and I'm already booking into April. It's pretty crazy. And Riverside's AI tools help with editing and sound quality, which makes it so much easier in the back end when I'm trying to polish the episodes so I can publish them. And Buzzsprout is helping me also track the performance, right? And the distribution. So, but the deeper reason is this because repetition builds mastery. I get to practice every week interviewing every time I step behind the microphone and hit record. I get to practice editing, practice publishing, practice thinking out loud about work. However, based on feedback from you, the listeners, which I've really appreciated, people are saying you want more of me and more reflection, more synthesis, more connecting the dots. So once a month, I'm going to do episodes like this reflection sessions where I step back, look at the conversations, and share what's resonating, what's challenging me, and what's shifting how I think about work. Most podcasts don't make it past 21 episodes. Many fade out after 6 months. Here we are in episode 38, and funny enough, I'm actually 38 years old at the time of this recording. So we're moving into month 7 and growing, and that's worth pausing and celebrating. When I first started Work Sucks, but I Like It, I knew I wanted it to be an interview style podcast, not because interviews are trendy, but because conversations reveal things we don't always see in our own. And let's be honest, every single one of us has had moments where work sucks. If you've ever feel isolated in that frustration, like you're the only one questioning what you're doing with a huge chunk of your waking life until retirement, well, this podcast hopefully has been for you. My hope is that from the beginning, it's really simple to help people see that they're not alone in work sucking, but we can make this add up to something with significant meaning in our lives when we develop those right skills. I've spoken with successful entrepreneurs, academics, creatives, people in technical trades, and people still trying to figure out what this whole work thing even means for them. And here's what's becoming obvious very quick is that there is no job, no role, no title, no how much, money this person makes, no career path that doesn't have parts that suck. There is no perfect solution to this work-life balance equation that I'm calling it. There's no universal definition of work that magically removes the friction we feel when the alarm goes off and gravity pulls us back toward the bed. Now, that gravity metaphor is intentional, by the way, because as you might have heard on one of the episodes, I define work from the physics definition where work is a force multiplied by the displacement of an object. I know it's a mouthful, but gravity is constantly pulling us down, right? And we must do work, move our hands and feet through space. And it's not just the physical forces acting on us like gravity, but it's also the psychological forces your boss, workplace culture, expectations, deadlines, emails, the stories you tell yourself about success and failure. All of these forces are acting on you as you try to move your body and mind, if you will, in space. And so that's work. Someone once told me that no place is perfect, no matter where you work or what you do. And eventually you have to come to terms with a certain level of acceptance. I agree with that, but I like to frame it a little more practically. Imagine your work experience as a percentage. Maybe 70 to 80% of it feels manageable, even enjoyable. The remaining 20 to 30% isn't ideal, but it's tolerable in the bigger picture. The problem is when those numbers start to flip, when the frustration outweighs the fulfillment, when burnout creeps in, when passion quietly really drains away, when you start this quiet quitting, as we've heard, not because you're lazy, but because you're exhausted and disconnected. This 20 to 30% you couldn't tolerate, you start to realize what was really way more important than you originally thought. That's where this podcast lives. My goal isn't to convince you to quit your job or chase some mythical dream role or even to be an entrepreneur in this show. Rather, it's to help you sustain that 70 to 80% sweet spot, or maybe even just simply starting to recognize it, so you can perform well, grow, and still have energy left for your life. And just as importantly, to examine why the other 20 to 30% sucks. Is it your boss, the culture, the structure of the work itself, or is it something about how you're showing up? Can we make it not suck? Because that's the part people don't like to hear, but eventually come to realize it's not always about what you do, it's often about how you do it. You've heard this across multiple episodes. Guests like Carolyn Sangle in episode 28, Peter Gunn in episode 20, and Mayor Ezra in episode 22 all emphasize the importance of family. That's work. It can certainly suck at times, but they do it because they love their family. Jake in episode 32 and Wes in episode 37 shared their entrepreneurial journeys, and that is also work because they love what they do. Jake being the civil engineer as he builds strong foundations for people to actively live today. Wes creating online relationships and marketing, not just reach for businesses, but the underlying message of the need for more human connection in a very online world. There were even some academics like Dr. Gazzara in episode 26 who actually worked with my favorite psychologist of all time. I still couldn't get over that, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who brought research and theory into the conversation through the lens of flow. Flow states have been correlated to happiness and well being in your life. I'm still jealous, if you can't hear it, by the way, of how I got to work with him. So, David Shar was another one that came on the show. He's from the University of Maryland, episode 24. He dove into what he called passion decline. And after that conversation, he said, "Oh, well, Tony, why don't we flip the script and I'll invite you to his Water Cooler Wednesday show, where he actually interviewed me about my work, which was really cool." And that moment was really awesome because it wasn't just because of the exposure, but because it reinforced the idea that these conversations really have to go both ways. We're all learning from each other in real time, and that is work too, right? And this is something I'm going to work on in 2026. So for you listeners, listen, you can hold me accountable to making sure I go on to other podcasts. Alex Sanfilippo, episode 29, said it so well that, traditional 9 to 5 isn't the villain here. It's often made out to be. In fact, for many people, it provides structure, something entrepreneurs often struggle with, as we've heard. I love his example, Alex, of literally childproofing his phone. His wife, will childproof his phone throughout the day from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a password, and beyond that, he can't use it. And that's not anti work, that's intentional work. And really a positive check mark for something that corporate America does somewhat well of structuring the hours for work. And this brings me to something I want to make very clear as the show moves forward. I don't like the false division between entrepreneurs and people who work 9 to 5 jobs. I don't buy into the narrative that the 9 to 5 is the enemy and that working for yourself is the only path to fulfillment. Listen to episode 11 when I interview my brother on a small business he runs and how he constantly is balancing work and life with a family and company to run. That's some hard work. Yes, there are differences between working for someone else and working for yourself, but at the core, we all work for ourselves and for others. The labels are optional, the perspective is really what matters. So when you listen to an episode featuring an entrepreneur, don't focus solely on what they do. Listen for what sucks, listen for the human parts. At episode 30 talked about the signal to noise ratio in today's digital world, how everyone's really shouting to be heard in this endless sea of content. And that frustration doesn't belong to entrepreneurs alone. It belongs to all of us, you and me. Whether you're asking for help on your project at work or trying to get your kids to listen to you at home, there's noise everywhere. The skill is to strengthen the signal of your voice and what you're saying in the world with the work you do. The podcast was never about glorifying one path over the other. It was just about exploring, really work as a human experience. It's messy, meaningful, frustrating, and occasionally joyful. And that intention really has not changed. So by the time I was deep into recording these interviews and these episodes, a pattern started to emerge, and I want to share that with you. No matter who I talk to, entrepreneurs, academics, creatives, engineers, parents, executives, or people early in their careers, the same themes kept surfacing. There were different stories, different industries, wildly different life circumstances, but yet same underlying tensions. The first one's identity. We tie who we are to what we do far more than we realize. It sneaks up on you, right? Someone asks, "So what do you do?" And without thinking, you answer with a job title, not a value, not a curiosity, not a way of being, a title, a role, a function inside an economic machine. Yet, as I keep saying, we are the creators of our own song and dance in this lifetime. But when that role starts to feel shaky, when the job changes, the company restructures, the market shifts, or burnout creeps in, it doesn't just threaten your income anymore, it threatens your sense of self. David Shar talks about this with his concept of passion decline. This also came up in different ways with guests like Jake in episode 32 and Wes in episode 37, both of whom talked about entrepreneurship as a process of constant identity recalibration. You don't just build a business, you build yourself over and over again. Every success shifts expectations, every failure forces you to confront who you thought you were. The second theme is burnout, though it often disguises itself as something else. People usually don't say I'm burned out. They say I'm tired, I'm bored, I just don't care anymore. And my personal favorite is the same shit, different day. So burnout isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's building in the background. And we need to measure our heart rate, like Garrett mentioned, to start seeing these results. And when Garrett talks about those that are passionate, he makes a great point that, when you're passionate, it's great until you do nothing but work because that's what you're passionate about. And then you burn out. But work no longer ends when the workday ends, as he indicates. And really, Garrett tells us that people are leveling up in burnout, and that's not a good thing, not a good way. Carolyn Sangal in episode 28 talked about this through the lens of family and priorities, how success can really quietly crowd out the very things it was supposed to support, which leads to frustrated and angry outbursts. Peter Gunn in episode 20 echoed that, reflecting on how ambition, if left unchecked, becomes a moving target that never actually satisfies. Then there's the structural side of burnout, the systems that reward overwork while pretending to celebrate balance. Alex in episode 29 made a point that stuck with me. Structure isn't the enemy, lack of boundaries is. Whether you work for yourself or someone else, work will take as much space as you allow it to take. Which brings us to the third theme, control. People crave autonomy, but they underestimate the responsibility that comes with it. Entrepreneurs will talk about freedom, but then they'll quietly admit that they've worked more hours in their lives than ever. Employees that talk about stability, wanting stability, then they feel trapped by decisions they didn't even make. And yet, here's the part that keeps the title honest of the show. Most people don't actually hate work, they hate misalignment. They hate feeling disconnected from impact. They hate being busy without being effective. They hate effort that doesn't move anything meaningful forward. They hate when work becomes performative instead of purposeful. But when they talk about moments of growth, contribution, mastery, collaboration, and when they talk about teaching their kids something important, solving a hard problem, helping a client, building a team, you can hear it in their voice. But that's the I like it part. It's messy, it's contradictory, it doesn't fit neatly into productivity frameworks or motivational quotes, and that's exactly why it matters. This conversation matters. Work forces us to confront who we are under pressure, how we handle responsibility, what we're willing to trade for security or freedom. Where do we draw these boundaries? Where we fail to draw them? And maybe that's why these themes kind of refuse to go away because they're not really about work at all. One of the other unexpected things that happened as this podcast began to grow was that the guests really started sounding the same to me. And I don't mean to discredit what they were telling me. And it's not that they were saying the same thing word for word, but as these themes came up, there was also this tone and underlying motivational force driving all of this. It was very similar in nature. And to me, I call that our song and dance. Like the oyster polishing that grit to make a pearl, everyone is agitated by something in this lifetime, but this friction gets the gears in motion towards living life. Now, early on, I thought I was sort of collecting these stories in some sense and putting them up there. But like I said, there was a pattern that was emerging on a bigger scale. Take Carrie, for example. On the surface, her world of fashion, travel, and pageantry feels far removed from manufacturing floors or corporate offices. But as we talked in that episode, it became obvious that her work wasn't about aesthetics, it was about transition, about walking people from backstage to onstage, not just in performance, but in life. And that phrase stuck with me, backstage to onstage, because that's exactly where so many people are at work, doing invisible labor, carrying responsibility without recognition, preparing endlessly, but never being invited forward. And then there was the thought of my own journey with work of being fired and breaking up and all the things I talk about in my first book, whose story wasn't really about hating work, but about losing myself inside confidence. I was good, reliable, trusted, but what was quietly, depleting me, not burned out in a dramatic way, I was just thinning out over time, and it was because I valued the wrong things. I remember thinking that's the most dangerous kind of dissatisfaction, the kind that doesn't explode, but really erodes, away at you. Unfortunately, I needed to get fired to realize this in the end. So people aren't, necessarily broken. They're not lazy or ungrateful when they say, I didn't hate my job. I just felt off and I was successful, what the work they were doing. Really, but they quit anyways. Really, they were just misaligned. So what started to hit me was this. Most people don't quit work because it sucks. They disengage because they don't feel seen inside it anymore. We blame corporate America as it feels good to point the blame somewhere, but it's more complex than that. But what is simple is the human relations of every day. It starts with the leaders, for example, not sending emails at 2 a.m. to see if their team responds. It starts with asking yourself, what does work and life really mean when I try to balance them? Is that even the equation you should be solving? This podcast is not about escaping work, it's about restoring the relationship with it to understand a person's song and dance. And this is where my role sort of shifted as a host. And I feel that of course, I'm still interviewing. I'm still trying to evoke a sort of story in each episode through a series of questions. But then I had this other sort of realization that I was instead becoming this sort of like translator. Guests would describe their experience in their own language, whether it be business, art, athletics, leadership, and listeners are hearing themselves in it. That's the idea, of course, with an interview style podcast. A yoga teacher would hear a civil engineer, a retiree would hear a startup founder, a woman in pageantry hearing of traveling from backstage to onstage in life. A burned out manager would hear a creative who finally slowed down. And that's kind of when it hit me that the show wasn't about what people are doing, but more just the realization that we're just being a human. We're constantly fighting gravity every day. It's that really simplified. Hence my favorite definition of work of a force multiplied by the displacement of an object from physics. And honestly, though, this existentialism of what the hell am I doing on this planet can get pretty heady at times. And we have to therefore tell our minds that we are doing something with our lifetime. You can't hide behind tactics anymore. It's not, you can't just say, here's how to be productive. Here's how to optimize your time. Here's how to fix your mindset. We have to start asking these harder questions. What is this work costing you? What is it giving back? What value is in it for you? Not the second meaning, the first meaning, the standards for which you live your life. And who are you becoming while doing it? In my first book, I call this, the thinking thumbprint. Everybody has their sort of impression of a good life, and I frame that as the thinking thumbprint. Just like a fingerprint is unique to each person, everybody's idea of success and values is unique to them. So here's the thing, work sucks is only half the sentence. If the podcast were just called Work Sucks, this would all be easy. It'd be relatable, cathartic, and then we're done. We have all something to complain about. Blame corporate America, blame the taxes, and so on. But Work Sucks, but I Like It forces a sort of good tension, promoting a good stress in our thinking. It forces us to sit in the paradox. Work can drain you and shape you. It can frustrate you and give you purpose. It can feel misaligned without being meaningless. So many guests lived inside that tension, not as a problem to solve, but as a reality to navigate. And that's where the show has become about. It's not fixing work, it's not escaping work, but relating to it differently, learning when to push, when to pause, when to redefine success, and when to admit that something once meaningful isn't anymore. That's not failure, that's growth. So if there's been an invitation underneath every episode, it's this, other than the skills that I like to leave, for you, the listener, after each episode, is that pay attention to what your work is asking of you and what it's giving back. Not in a dramatic quit your job way, but in an honest, ongoing conversation with yourself. Because meaning isn't something you find once, it's something you have to sort of renegotiate over time. And the people who seem the most grounded aren't the ones with perfect careers. They're the ones who keep listening to their energy, their values, their season of life, if you will, their song and dance. That's what the guests have been teaching me. And that's what the listeners, reflecting. And, this isn't an individual problem, it's really a systemic one. And one of the most dangerous narratives, if we've absorbed, is that dissatisfaction at work is a personal failure. If you're tired, you're weak. If you're bored, you're ungrateful. If you're restless, you're irresponsible. And corporate America loves this because they transact you as an employee number, either in or out the door every day, with KPIs, key process indicators, these goals for the company, always driving to be growing and nonstop doing something to not fall behind. But when the same themes show up across industries, ages, and life stages, even across, different cultures around the world, it stops being an individual issue. It becomes a design problem. We've optimized work for output, efficiency, and scalability, but not for meaning, not for dignity, not for long term human sustainability. This is where you hear so many people on the show wanting to quit corporate America and do their own thing. But what if we could change this? I'm not talking about another flavor of the month crap campaign. I'm talking about people starting to realize their number one meanings of value and placing that over what something is worth. Several guests dance around this problem before naming it outright. The system rewards endurance more than awareness, it celebrates sacrifice more than alignment, and it often mistakes availability for commitment. So people have sort of adapted. They numb themselves over a steady paycheck or the drone of same shit, different day, and they, fall for the trap of emailing their boss back at 2 a.m. in the morning when this email gets sent out at 1. And they overperform trying to fit in, even as an entrepreneur, right? Entrepreneurs still have their sort of like, things that suck as well. This culture, seems surprised, which is interesting to me when we see engagement drop, quiet quitting and, burnout. And corporate America is left sort of floundering, looking for employees to fill the buildings that are slowly dissolving every day. So what's happening? And this is where my PhD work kicks in for me, the paradox of work. So how many guests describe moments of deep engagement, energy, clarity, timelessness without ever using the word flow? And flow is most often found at work because it has all three antecedents to get into the zone: clear goals, immediate feedback, and constant challenges testing your skills every day. But the paradox of work is that when you ask someone where they'd rather be, they don't say work, they say outside of work. So, why is there this paradox? And the thing is, flow isn't a luxury and it shouldn't be overlooked in the work we do. It's really a signal for corporations and leaders and managers to really design into their days because it tells us something about fit, challenge, autonomy, and purpose. But most workplaces treat all this as accidental, something that happens if everything else goes right. Managers are quick to find the fault, but slow to praise work that is done well. But what if we could reshape all this? That's really my goal with this podcast. Guests came expecting to share stories about tasks, companies, or industries, but what emerged over and over again was really I wanted reflection. We have all this experience, and life is about experiencing as well as reflection on those experiences. So after 38 episodes, the threads are kind of starting to become visible, which is sort of cool. And I'm starting to notice, maybe you're starting to notice these patterns, not just in work, but in people, how they show up, how they fail, how they persist. And one of the most striking realizations is that work is never just work, it's identity, it's expression, it's negotiation with the world and with yourself. Take Carrie back in episode 34, for example. At first glance, her work in pageantry and travel might seem niche or glamorous, but who wouldn't want to travel the world? But what she really illustrated is the process of moving people from backstage to on stage in life. The confidence, the courage, the presence, that's work. That's learning to show up in a way that aligns with your values. Or Ron Reich in episode 21, who reminded us that even in the toughest moments, you can love what you do. The grind doesn't disappear, the stress doesn't vanish. But when your work aligns with your sense of meaning, the frustration becomes manageable, even energizing. Kristen Swan, episode 25, drilled into me a lesson I think we all ignore. It's pause, right? In a culture of perpetual motion, pausing is like this radical idea, for productivity hacks, but really for the sense of presence. To notice, to breathe, to recalibrate, because we rush, rush, rush in our lives. But guests like Kristen remind us that the most important work is sometimes the stillest. West Towers, episode 37, brought us back to the human dimension of work when he found himself in tears under his desk. Yes, digital connection is powerful as he built his whole company, international company, based on that, but trust and relationship still happen offline, and this needs to be maintained. It's a lesson for anyone building a team, a business, or just trying to survive modern life. And really, what I want to say in all this is that work is just a mirror for ourselves. And if there's one lesson that, echoes louder than anything with all these episodes is that work cannot be reduced to a transaction. I know corporate America continually wants to label things as this transaction. Sure, there's the money, sure, there's the output, but the deeper work is the question of being a human being living today. It's emotional, it's psychological, it's relational. This work can suck, but we are finding people that like it. The story of Brooke, episode 13, running a local pickleball community while working at a college is a perfect example. She's not a professional pickleball player. She's not globally famous because of it. But the work she does matters. Her local community loves her for this, even if they don't tell her outright. They do so by showing up each week to play in the community league. She comes in early to set the courts and stays late to take them down. She lays the tape each match. And yes, it sucks at times, she's told me, but she has found this to be part of her song and dance. And that's the true measure of what we do in this lifetime. I joined her pickleball league because of how much she loved running it. And so let's begin to wrap up this episode today and summarize some key things of what has changed in the show. I've re-examined my assumptions about entrepreneurship versus 9 to 5. Remember, there's no hierarchy or division. It's just alignment. Remember, work is that mirror for us. I've started noticing my own need for pause, reflection, and calibration. The sense that motivation isn't permanent in people, it's a skill to be cultivated. Much like when I was training for marathons, we have to keep telling ourselves that motivation is permanent every day with the work that we do. And most importantly, I've learned to see hosting not as a microphone, but as, again, that mirror that we've talked about, reflecting back what, is already inside the guest and occasionally what's inside me and maybe you as the listener as well. And at PodFest 2026, with a concussion and a packed schedule, the lesson was the same: presence over perfection. Showing up, even imperfectly, is the work. Listening, engaging, learning, that's all work. The success stories were the same in that the work sucked for what seemed like long periods of time. And then all of a sudden, as these speakers on stage would just say, it was like a dam had opened and the flow of life, if you will, came rushing out. And that success looks different for every single one of us, whether you're in corporate, or an entrepreneur, or someone in between. So let's look to the future of where this podcast is evolving. And I'm constantly redesigning my approach and trying to be a better host and everything. And really, the next phase is not about productivity hacks. Of course, I'll be trying to learn them with the back end, processing, but really about human experience. And I've been inspired by podcaster Pat Flynn on his reflections of online content and the rise of AI. Tips and tricks are everywhere, and what's rarer and more valuable is the conversation about transformation. How people arrived at those solutions, what it took to grow, what they learned about themselves along the way. Those are the stories that only people can tell. Future episodes will dive deeper into these conversations as I continue to work my skill as a host. And it's my goal to be a guest on shows too, like I mentioned, something that I haven't really started doing yet. But I did schedule my photo shoot, so I'm taking the step in that direction. But as some of you have been asking, I do want to make more solo episodes just to reflect. I think it's important to kind of summarize all these conversations. If you miss some, you can always just tune into this episode to kind of get caught up in the show. But obviously, I'd encourage you to go back to the episodes to get the full, experience of listening to the guest and that experience. And just a reminder, as I promised real quick, the working title for my fourth book, drumroll please, you probably guessed it, Work Sucks, but I Like It. And the working subtitle right now is The Missing Ingredient Today. So, Work Sucks, but I Like It, The Missing Ingredient Today. And we'll be exploring this further in the show as I kind of evolve this piece, and I've already started writing it and outlining it. And it, of course, will be drawing from my PhD work in IO psychology, my personal journey, and the insights from, of course, all these interviews on the show. But essentially, the book's going to try and tackle what do you do when you feel frustrated with your work? How do you decide whether to push through or pivot with the work you do? What why you really don't get from A to B with your goals, how to develop the skills to overcome burnout and stay engaged, how to find meaning and agency in your work. And, the lesson is simple. Work might suck sometimes, but if you pay attention, it can still teach you something and you can end up liking it. So keep asking questions, keep talking with others, keep reflecting. Pick the episodes that resonate with you. Don't get overwhelmed by the two a week. Grow the skill of adding value to what you need in this moment with your work to take you to your goals. Revisit past conversations when life throws a new challenge your way. Remember, success is not a matter of good luck, it's good skill. And today, again, the skill is remembering that we live in a world of people, not social media accounts grabbing more subscribers and likes. We live in a world that is thirsting for actual human connection and not necessarily reliant on high speed internets. So take inventory of those that inspire you and those that truly influence you. And if that person influences you, do something to make them know that. Write a review for them. Tell them thank you in person for what you do and how you show up in the world today. We need more of this small talk today. You're not alone in the struggle to find existence and meaning in your lifetime. It's not about what you do, but how you do it and how you show up every day. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, and for doing the work. We'll see you next time.